It's sort of like when you call 911 and you're like, hey, I need some help. I think I'm having a medical problem. And then 10 minutes later, the SWAT team kicks down your door and flashbangs you. Like,
we're here to help.
Exactly. Except instead of the SWAT team, it's just like every mall cop in the Tri-County area.
Oh, on our way, we killed a ton of pedestrians.
Just beat them to death with the segways. It was great.
Just Paul Blart. I want Kingdom of Heaven only with Paul Blart.
Welcome to Bible Boys, a podcast where two ex-evangelical siblings and an ex-Catholic non-sibling watch Christian media and either praise or condemn it. I'm Aaron.
I'm Josh. And there's no Michael.
Since it's Michael's birthday week, it's just going to be me and Josh this time. We're going to return to our Book of Eli watch hopefully next week. But in the meantime, me and Josh figured we'd give you all just kind of a little historical primer on the Third Crusade since we watched Kingdom of Heaven last week. I cut this from the episode actually, but we were having a conversation about the Second and Third Crusade and where Kingdom of Heaven fell in it, and as it turns out, Kingdom of Heaven technically is not in the Second Crusade, but not in the Third Crusade either. It's like the impetus for it, which is very strange and weird, but
that really messed my understanding of it up, because as a child, I always thought this was the Second Crusade, and that's just not right.
Yeah, I mean, because they don't tell you, they don't make it a point to be like, okay, so the Second Crusade was a huge fuck up, and it did definitely lead to the fall of Jerusalem, which wasn't really in between. So we just kind of skip over that one and go to the Third Crusade because that's where all the cool battles happened. But we're gonna try to give you a brief, friendly summary of what happened in the Crusades. I don't know that it's going to be especially structured. Or long, but we'll see what's going to happen. I think we'll have a good time.
Yeah, Aaron and I are just kind of like big history nerds across the board. Listeners know that I have a degree in history, and this is just stuff we kind of talk about normally when Aaron's not yelling at me for being heathen.
But I think we can both agree that media and popular culture has really kind of shaped what people think the Third Crusade is. And it'd just be interesting to talk about it and our thoughts on the kind of images that, Richard has turned into specifically.
Yeah, Josh, let's start there. I mean, what media do you think has shaped your perception of the Crusades, especially the Third Crusade, the most?
Do you know the animated Robin Hood?
The one with the fox?
The sexy fox, yes.
Okay, I didn't add that, but carry on.
The sexy fox, thank you for clarifying. So in that, the reason why the terrible villain is there is because Richard the Lionheart, the great king of Europe, the one of England, who would do such a great job, isn't there. So that's the reason everything's fallen to shit, and Robin Hood has to go on a stealing. Yeah,
I mean, I think similarly, not that specific Disney's Robin Hood, but a different animated Robin Hood. I have very strong memories of watching this kind of shoddily animated kids cartoon. And at the end, Richard the Lionheart shows up and they make a point to be like, oh, he's back from the Crusades. And my little baby brain was like, oh, the Crusades? That sounds cool. It's like a teaser trailer. It's like when at the end of a Marvel movie, somebody shows up and it's like, hey, we've got more movies for you. Except in this instance, it's not just a fun family time with all your greatest superheroes, but it's just a lot of religious bigotry.
Yeah, it's like if Nick Fury showed up at the end of Iron Man and then massacred the family members of the Avengers.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about that.
Also, we need to discuss nicknames in medieval times were fucking awesome. Richard the Lionheart is a awesome name. It is so good.
It's kind of unfair, really, that you can just I'm the Lionhearted now. Oh, you are? Why is that? Did you slay a lion? No, I just didn't fuck up a crusade as bad as everyone else except for the first one.
I had the second best Crusade.
Yes. If you all want to talk about the first Crusade, there's of course there's dozens of videos on it. I think the Extra Credits YouTube channel has a great video primer that kind of breaks all down the major characters and plot points, and probably like you could watch it in like 40 minutes. Highly recommend that channel. But yeah, if you watch that, basically you'll know that the first Crusade was just like kind of a lucky like break. Basically, nobody really knew who was in charge, but they just had a bunch of Christian soldiers that were able to sort of stumble their way into victory. And
it's kind of like if Firefest took over Cuba.
I mean, is it?
Yeah, because they were like, yeah, we'll invite some like rich and famous people and they'll come here and really make our money. And then like a giant locust-esque crowd of peasants murdered everything in every religion, all the way from Germany to Turkey, and then were killed by a large Muslim army. And then the actual Crusaders showed up and did the rest of the work.
Yeah, good times. Anyway, you all remember that, in the movie Kingdom of Heaven, right? The whole big deal is that, at the end, fucking Orlando Bloom has to surrender the city to Saladin, and they have like kind of a great exchange where he's like, "What's Jerusalem? Nothing, everything." That classic line that we all think was a really good piece of writing. But like, I think that's actually where the Third Crusade begins, because there's this bit where we see Guy lead his soldiers out against Orlando Bloom's advice, and they get wiped out. But in history, that's the Battle of Hattin. Historically, Guy is not quite as rude and stupid as it might you might think if you only watch Kingdom of Heaven. But essentially, yeah, what happened was Saladin had captured the city of Tiberias, and Guy was riding out to meet him and try to figure out what's going on, trying to respond to Saladin's attacks. They basically, what happened was they got surrounded by the Saracen cavalry. They were extremely thirsty. That it was historically accurate. Just got one of the main things that you'll probably know if you've played any amount of any Crusader-based strategy game is that the Muslim armies are generally a lot less heavy cavalry, a lot more like archers and javelins, skirmisher cavalry, which they use to kind of just harass the Christian armies. And eventually what happens at the Battle of Hattin, it's very exciting and much more interesting than I'm making it sound here. But basically what happens is they get surrounded, a couple divisions of infantry break off and are able to escape, and Saladin just lets them, because then there's just the rest of Guy's main army, which gets trapped and destroyed, and Guy is taken prisoner. After that, Jerusalem falls, and it's like kind of a huge deal. Allegedly, the Pope Urban III dies when he hears that Jerusalem it has been lost. He has a heart attack. I think that's
got his ass.
That'd be extremely funny if like Saladin indirectly killed the Pope.
If I was Saladin, I would put that. I'd be like Pope Slayer Saladin.
Yes,
I would
that
go
would be
all
your
for
new nickname.
Dude was all about allowing people to come into the Holy Land no matter the religion. I think he should have taken that dub.
Yeah, really, really good. So anyway, Urban's successor, Gregory VIII, goes ahead and proclaims the Third Crusade. And here's where we're going to get into our main characters. Josh, I believe you have the most notes about Richard. So do you want us to talk about him?
Yeah. So Richard's an interesting guy because everyone knows him from like the big imagery of like, this is, he was a Crusader king. Good game, by the way, boys. However, he is such a weird character because he didn't do that much. He didn't spend that much time actually ruling England. He spent most, either fighting the French or going in the fighting in the Crusades or getting his ass captured, which we'll talk about later. But what you need to know at this point is that when the Pope called for the Crusade, he was looking at three monarchs, and that was the monarch of France, England, and then the leader of the Holy Roman Empire. and the Holy Roman Emperor was like, hells yeah, and England and France said, hold up, we're not done kicking each other, we're fighting, we need to get done kicking each other. And then eventually Richard and the French king made up through marriage alliances that Richard ruined later. Richard was a dumb guy. He was so fucking dumb. You remember in Game of Thrones, I'm sorry to trigger people, but in Game of Thrones, when Robb Stark threw away his alliances so he could marry that one lady, fucking Richard.
Yeah, Richard is, I feel like, as I did a very small amount of research for this particular episode, I learned that Richard not as impressive as his cool nickname would make him sound. Like the reason that he, the Crusade is initially called here, right, is not only because the English are fighting the French, but specifically because Richard has allied with the French against his dad, and is trying to usurp his dad as ruler to make sure that he doesn't get disowned, because like the inheritances and vassalage is very strange back in the medieval era. But basically, he eventually forces his father to make it a guarantee that once his father dies, Richard will become the king of England. And very soon after this peace treaty is signed, his dad does die, and Richard's like, great. I did say I was going to do the Crusade, and being in France/England is boring, so I'm going to go. He does do one notable thing, which is he raises this thing called the Saladin tax, which basically is just like a new tax that he levied on all of his realms to pay for the Crusaders. There's a quote from Wikipedia that says that he would have sold the city of London itself if he could have found a buyer. Like that's how allegedly devoted he was to the Crusades.
And he then later in his adventures sells some of the things he conquers.
Yeah. Funny how that works out for a lot of these folks.
But also, if you're like, well, maybe he was just a bad leader, I would now like to get to the section of his Wikipedia page that says anti-Jewish violence.
Great.
So, first thing he does, he's crowned, and then some Jewish leaders were like, cool, we're going to go present gifts to the new king. Sounds like a good thing to do, a lot of anti-Semitism going around, maybe that will help. So he stripped and flogged all of the Jewish leaders and then flung them out of court.
Yeah.
And then a rumor went around, I wonder how this rumor got started, that said that Richard had ordered all of the Jews to be killed. So the people of London went and massacred the Jewish population there. Every single fucking crusade begins with this.
It's just so weird that we think of the Crusades as like this, Christians and Muslims slaughtering each other and committing massacres, when the Jews kind of get left out of the picture because they are just always downtrodden by the people of Europe at this time. Just so gross.
And even moving beyond the Jewish people in Jerusalem, it's well, yeah, this little town in Germany, all the Jews that lived there got massacred. Why? Ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba. These people were idiots.
Yeah, I mean, one day we should do an episode about the roots of anti-Semitism and how it ties directly into Christianity. I think that would be very interesting. That would be a very good episode. Unfortunately, we don't have the time or nuance to speak about that right now. But yeah.
Do you want to talk about our main man, Philip?
I don't have a whole lot to say about Philip. The YouTube video that I watched to prepare for this episode, I'll link in the notes. But basically, all I learned about Philip was that he, was fighting Henry's father, or Richard's father, who was Henry II at the time. Yes. And then he sort of allied with Richard, took up the cross, and then later on, once the siege of Acre, I believe, is concluded. Philip just dips. He's like, well, this is awful. I hated this. I'm going back to France. Eventually, he starts up shit again and forces Richard to come back. But yeah, Philip is, kind of like he of course is, an important Crusader king. But unfortunately, I don't have a whole lot of very interesting details about him.
2 quick facts. When he bounced, he left soldiers and their pay behind.
Cool.
Which is, I don't know why that made me laugh. Just he was like, and here are these soldiers, here's what I was gonna pay them. Anyway, bye.
Y'all could just sort this out yourselves.
Also, just a fun fact about state building in the medieval times. He is the first king to really be known as King of France. Previously, they had been known as Kings of the Franks.
Oh yeah, because this is like 200 years after Charlemagne, right?
Yeah, this is not long. So this is kind of when France is being known as a nation, no longer as a group of people. And you can hear more about that and when I rant about nationalism and its growth during this time period.
The third Crusader king that Josh mentioned previously was Frederick Barbarossa, or Frederick the First.
My man!
Yeah, he's the Holy Roman Emperor, the conqueror of Italy. He's arguably the most powerful ruler in Europe at the time. He takes the cross in 1188, and he's very gung ho about it, and he brings some accounts had him having an army of 100,000 strong, probably not that many, but like people were impressed with the guy. Yeah, and like he starts an overland journey. He doesn't go the water route. He tries to go through Constantinople, and gets into some trouble there because the Byzantine Empire had made a truce with Saladin, and Saladin was like, "Hey, please don't let them come through. They're so annoying."
Be cool for like a minute. Be cool for like a minute, and don't let them do this. You don't like them either.
And then the Byzantines were like, "Yeah, sure, they suck." And then eventually Frederick has to push through the Byzantines and threatens them, and they're like, "Okay, fine, just go away." And hopefully this doesn't come back to bite us later. And unfortunately it will. But yeah, Frederick Barbarossa is a very interesting character, I feel.
Fun facts about him. He made it a point during the Third Crusade to make it illegal to kill Jewish people. Can we get a clap in the chat for bare minimum? Also, he died because he was thrown from his horse, which was how most kings died. Even funner fact, William the Conqueror, the man who conquered England, was thrown from his horse, and he was a larger man at the time, and there was some intestinal blockage that eventually led to his body exploding when it was laid to rest in the church.
Okay, well...
This is my first opportunity to go full history facts, and I'm doing it.
I did not know that about William the Conqueror. That's unfortunate.
Yeah, he exploded.
Cool. Great. Yeah. That is basically all I know about Frederick Barbarossa, though. Like, I know that he was like gonna be a huge deal, and Saladin was very worried about him. And then he just drowned, and his whole army, like, afterwards just basically disintegrated and never really got to partake in any of the major sieges or battles.
He was also in his 60s when he decided to go do this. And that's insane. Like, I am, like, in my early 20s, and if someone was like, "Do you want to go overland from fucking, like, Austria down to Jerusalem?" Fuck you.
My dad just turned 60 this year. And I'm thinking about it. My dad could lead a crusade, I think.
Let's hope he doesn't.
I wouldn't advise it. I don't think he's really that kind of Catholic, but I do. He could do it. He's healthier than me, I think. So
he's a healthy 60.
He's a healthy 60. I think my dad would survive being thrown from a horse. Is all I'm saying. I think my dad could kick Frederick Barbarossa's ass, and I dare any of you to prove me wrong.
Celebrity boxing match. Frederick of Barbarossa versus Aaron's papa.
Yeah, my papa would whoop up on him.
I love the estimates that they have of soldiers, because anytime you get to, like, especially, I studied a bit of ancient history, and with those numbers, we have no fucking idea. They're like, yeah, there were 8 billion Persians that attacked at Thermopylae, and historians are like, there weren't, but we don't know how many there were. And when it's medieval sources, we can kind of tell a bit better. And they have ranges at that time period where, like, Frederick's army had 600,000 men and 20,000 knights, when in fact he probably had about 10,000 men and about 2,000 knights.
Yeah, just like, how many horses do you think are ready to be mounted and fought with at this time period? Like, that's so much logistical trouble to go through. Like,
do you know how much food 600,000 people eat? I don't think y'all do.
Yeah, it's It's a lot. There's a reason. Even when we get into the American Civil War, right? The armies don't really get much larger than 100,000 at a time. Like, and that would be the very biggest of them. I think at Gettysburg there were like what, maybe between 50 and 80,000.
I believe that is correct.
At the battle's peak, yeah. So like, the huge armies, but like just because of keeping men and horses fed and clothed and in good supply is a hard thing to do, and that's why all these crusading stories, it's probably a lot smaller than the bigger numbers would suggest, just because it's hard to do.
And it's not the fun and sexy part, but it's the part I find way more interesting. Like, logistics is how these things go well. Yeah. It's amazing that any of these crusades won, because everyone leading it were much more like, we'll go there, and through God and knights and my sword, we will win. Meanwhile, Saladin's like, cool, we're gonna stay where the water is.
Cool, we like to be hydrated over here.
Yeah, that's just an opinion. I don't know how they do it in England.
Speaking of Saladin, I just want to give him, because he's the main, Saracen general. He is the Kurdish Sultan of both Egypt and Syria. He came to power by, there was the Fatimid Caliphate, was kind of in power in the Levant at the time, and he was able to switch their allegiances to the Abbasids. He helped overthrow them. And he is the guy who defeated Guy de Lusignan and took over Jerusalem. So like he's kind of a big deal at this point, right? And I think maybe that's why the Third Crusade is so epic in the minds of the Christians, because like there is, to some degree, like it's kind of impressive that they were able to finally put a couple dents in Saladin's armor, because at this point he had been seen as invincible.
I have to do another history fact. I'm so sorry. The Fatimid dynasty in Egypt is one of the first ever dynasties named after a woman, and also I think that you're right that like Saladin is, if you are looking at this through the eyes of Europe, which most of our media is, he makes an amazing villain, because he's not like this mustache twirling wahaha for evil. Like he is a fully fleshed out character, which I hate saying in a historical sense, and I think that's why this crusade above all of the others, because you have Richard the Lionheart, Philip of France, Frederick Barbarossa versus Saladin. Like, it sounds interesting. You can paint a very pretty picture.
I mean, I don't think you're wrong to call any of these people characters, because at a certain point, at a certain level of technology, people are mythologized, and they become the product of their stories. Now historians do a great lot of work trying to be as accurate as possible, but until we get kind of like until the modern era where we have video cameras and constant surveillance journalism, right? Like a lot of these people are just kind of the product of the works and stories that were told about them. So I don't think it's wrong to, that's why the Crusades are so big in the minds of everyone, because they are just a grand narrative that's been kind of told over the years, despite the fact that they were kind of awful.
Yeah. And you do get a lot of, specifically with right-wing media, I hate to bring it up to this, but Mike would be upset if we didn't. They really romanticized the Crusades, and it's part of that erasure of history to make it fit into something perfect. Like, this is when men were men, we went on crusades. And I think that is done mostly because of the nice little story that's been painted with this.
I'm so glad you brought up the right wing, because I am bringing back, loyal listeners will remember that occasionally I will bring out my church history textbook. I have not only have I got some great screenshots, I've also purchased that textbook from eBay, so that I'll have a physical copy in the future.
It was just too good.
It was, yeah. Listen, $10 plus $9.75 in shipping, cannot pass up a deal like that. But yeah, so under the motivation for the Crusades section of my textbook, Even before the First Crusade, the concept was understood in the West that God would reward those who fought for the good cause of defending Christendom. In addition, many of the popes, clerics, and bishops who preached the Crusades offered religious indulgences to the soldiers. An indulgence is a remission before God of temporal punishment due to sins. In addition to spiritual motivations, the church offered other incentives, including the reduction of taxes, dissolving of debt payments, and the protection of the Crusaders' families. And that's all pretty much true. However, this section ends with a very interesting sentence, which is, the Christian world was a prime target for the earliest caliphs, and it would remain so for Muslim leaders for the next 1,000 years.
Ooh.
So, glad we got a little Catholic insight onto what we consider the Muslim world and how they are opposed to the Christian world. We'll bring up some more information from that textbook.
I'm not looking forward to when that author learns about the population of Indonesia.
Yeah, like any of the Muslims world, yeah, but don't worry about that.
Yeah. I do love that it was like, it has to protect the good state of Christendom when if you look back at the First Crusade, this was Orthodox Christianity. This was not Catholicism.
Yeah, exactly right. This is after the Great Schism, so like, they are really protecting Byzantium at this point, or Constantinople rather. But that's oh, good. We love our propaganda, and I will be sure to spoon feed it out in loving little chunks as this podcast continues.
I just have to bring up this like slight talking point. Can you imagine being so egotistical as a pope, where you look at the like Orthodox Catholicism break and thinking, what if I just got in there and fixed it?
I mean, that is what Urban II was doing, right?
Yeah, he was like, you know what would fix this situation? 30 to 40,000 Europeans.
Yeah, if we just send them all over there, the Byzantines are going to be so grateful that we fought off the Saracens that they're going to renounce all of their practices that they've built up over the past several decades / centuries.
And Constantinople was like, oh, cool. So like knights, well-trained, disciplined. And the Pope was like, oh, you just meant... No, Peter the Hermit grabbed a ton of just guys.
Yeah, no, they're mostly farmers and people who are really, really eager. Is that cool? Do they have like swords or like... No, but they have like... One of them probably has a donkey.
You know what they've got? Gumption.
That's better than 1,000 knights, I say. Thanks, Urban. Cool.
Deus Vault, man.
All right. So there's a couple important events that we want to hit. I don't know that we have too much detail on them, but I think probably the most significant, aside from Frederick Barbarossa drowning in a stream.
What could be more important than that?
I mean, that probably had a pretty... we would live in a different world if that guy just had fucking taken a boat across that river that day. But... yeah, I think probably the most important thing to start with is the Siege of Acre, which took a very, very long time. But essentially what happened was... Just pull up the Wikipedia so I can be sure.
I'm looking at it with you.
Great. Oh, there's so many sieges.
Here's the fucking problem.
Acre got fucked up.
Guys, here's the Crusades. The Muslim army takes over a city. The Christian army takes over that city. The Muslim army takes over that city. The Christian army takes over that city. Repeat. That's every fucking crusade.
Every single one.
This happens until fucking Genghis Khan just rips through here.
Once Genghis shows up, everyone's like, okay, we're done. Crusades are over. We're not fucking with whatever those are. Absolutely not.
So, I again, sorry. I had a professor that taught the history of Islam, and when we were covering this, she kind of moved pretty quickly through the Crusades. And someone was like, aren't we going to talk about like the Crusader state? Some lasted for 70 years. And she described the Crusades as someone breaking into your house and stealing your wallet, and described Genghis Khan as someone running down the neighborhood and burning down every house.
Yeah, compared to the Golden Horde, the Crusaders were a minor inconvenience. But
yes.
Maybe one day we'll talk about the Mongols. But yeah, the siege of Acre. Acre was important because it was like kind of a main place for the Crusaders to get a foothold and start sending their forces south and closer to Jerusalem, which was their ultimate goal. And essentially, what happened was that Saladin had gone to lay siege to this city, and over the course of several months, he's besieging it, and Crusaders are starting to file in and reinforce the city. And there is a point, where I think he battles Guy, who he had previously freed from captivity, even though Guy promised never to fight against him again.
Guy is a little bastard, man, who falls ass backwards into so many kingdoms. This dude gets handed more kingdoms than any person I can think of.
Yeah, Kingdom of Heaven, especially the director's cut, was like, yeah, and then he lived a really sad but penitent life because he was told to rise a knight at the end of it, and he, definitely felt bad about losing everything. And the real Guy was just like, no, I think I'm just gonna get rich again and lie to everyone. It's gonna be great.
Richard sold him an island. Richard sold an island to this man.
Yeah, it rules. But yeah, so over the course of several months, right, Saladin is laying siege to the city, and Crusaders are starting to pour in. And there is a very famous point where enough Crusaders are there that they can make a counterattack against Saladin's army, and they actually drive him from his camp. And ironically, like, they could have beaten Saladin if they hadn't stopped to loot the camp. But unfortunately, the Templars were, the main people who were doing the most disciplined fighting, but like the regulars were just kind of chilling in Saladin's camp. And once Saladin was able to reorganize and start pushing back against the Templars, they came running back, and they were like, oh shit, yo, we gotta go. But yeah, after this like kind of inconclusive battle, the siege of Acre goes on until eventually Saladin is forced to abandon the city just because there's the Acre sits on a port, and the Crusaders not only have a great like naval I phrased this wrong, right? No, Guy is besieging Acre, right?
Yes.
Shit.
So
Okay.
Saladin is in Acre, and Guy takes the remaining crusading force to siege the city, and then eventually we get Leopold, who is like the important individual from like Germany, and then the Holy Roman Empire. Philip of France shows up, and then eventually Richard shows up, and then they take the city, and then they all argue about who gets the money.
Yeah, it's a cool time. But yeah. Anyway, the siege of Acre is technically a win for the Crusaders, right? They're able to finally take over this city that was held by Muslim forces. They're eventually able to negotiate. I don't believe Acre is looted and destroyed, like a lot of the Crusaders wanted to do, but yeah, it's a big win because it opens up the entire area we know as we call the Middle East for them.
So I just also want to point out that after this point, Saladin and Richard begin like their, to quote my brother, bromance. And this is where Saladin sends his brother,
Al-Adil.
Al-Adil. Okay, so Al-Adil, Saladin's brother, begins talking with Richard about like, hey, so what are we going to do with like the captured Muslim soldiers and the women and children, and we've got some crusaders. And then Richard was like, you're taking too long, and killed almost 3,000 prisoners in front of Saladin's army. And Saladin's like, oh cool, so that's what we're fucking doing, and then did the same thing to his Christian prisoners. And so began the war crimes.
Yeah.
That's a joke that's been going on the whole time. War sucks.
Yeah, we should I think it might be a controversial thing to say, but I think the Bible Boys podcast is anti-war.
Joe Biden.
Yeah, after the siege of Acre, we do get kind of the most famous battles of the Crusades, right? We get the battles of Arsuf and Jaffa, where we get these fights between Richard and Saladin, where we see these kind of the brilliant strategist of Saladin, trying to outwit the Crusaders, and because of their military technology, they have very heavy armor, and to his credit, Richard gets surrounded and cut off and has to fight his way out of several difficult situations. The Battle of I believe Arsuf, he's nearly outnumbered 2-1, and is still able to not only hold off Saladin, but is able to push him back, and eventually make his way to Jerusalem. That is unfortunately for the Crusaders, where the happy endings, where the story does not have a happy ending. Do you want to talk about the struggle for Jerusalem?
Yeah, so Jerusalem doesn't go well, because at this point there'd been so much infighting for the Crusaders, and this is partially what gets Richard in trouble. So Richard thought Guy should regain the throne. Meanwhile, Leopold, the of Austria, the Holy Roman Empire guy, I don't believe he's the emperor, he's just one of the very important dukes, wanted a different person who I believe was related to the old King Baldwin. And the two hated each other for that, to the point where, like, in the fucking siege of Acre, Richard just tosses the German flag off of, like, the wall at one point. Just, like, what the fuck, man?
Just a stunt on him.
Yeah, just got him. Got-y. So at this point, everything had been pretty split, and the army couldn't really decide what to do. So even though that, like, Jerusalem was, like, right there, since they were so split, one army wanted to go one way, like, towards Egypt, and the other army wanted to just go and take Jerusalem. And Richard was like, I am cool with going to Jerusalem, but if we go to Jerusalem and it's not all of us, I'm just fighting as common soldier, because fuck you guys. And they're like, why would you what the fuck? Also, when they voted to see who would be king, it was Leopold's guy. Guy received no votes.
Rip.
And Richard sold him Cyprus. But Leopold's guy, Conrad, was then killed by two assassins. And
remember Assassin's Creed, right?
Yeah.
It's those guys.
What's so fucking good is that because that it was like a group called Assassins, in Wikipedia it's capitalized.
Yeah, exactly. Like, they're literally just called the Assassins of that
That's where
fortress.
we get the name.
Yeah.
And then eventually Richard's nephew is married to the queen and becomes the king. And most people think Richard did the fucking assassinating. And that gets him in so much trouble later. It gets him in a ton of trouble.
Orchestrating an assassination against a fellow Crusader is frowned upon, generally speaking. And at this point, like Josh said, the Crusade fragments, they never able to mount a successful assault against Jerusalem. The city remains in Muslim hands throughout the end of the war. There is one final battle at Jaffa where Saladin tries to break the Crusaders, but it is repulsed from, again, this video that I'm linking in the show notes. Just like Richard has like a very, very strong crossbow line that is able to destroy the light cavalry of the Muslim army, like, and they weren't able to do any sort of cool encircling moves. They had to charge them head on and were destroyed. And that forces Saladin to come to an uneasy peace, or 3 years of peace. So, like, an okay peace with the Crusaders. They say, like, we're not going to give you Jerusalem because you dummies couldn't take it.
You didn't earn it.
Come on. Y'all got to do better than that. But they did, allow Christians to start visiting the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And, it allows everybody to be like, okay, well, things are, we did it. We beat Saladin, so that's good. And
literally before the year ends, Richard is imprisoned by Leopold, the Duke of Austria. And his mom has to come and ransom him out.
You ever have such a bad day that you have to call your mom and be like, Mom,
And
Can
he
you
dies.
bail me out? I did a bad job on the Crusade.
He dies fucking 5 years later. But also, weirdly enough, Saladin dies a year after the fight in Jaffa. And his heirs kind of fight over all of it he conquered, which is just kind of par for the course in medieval times.
Yeah, to the strongest, right?
Yeah. Medieval times, am I right? But just one last Saladin fact. During the capture of Jaffa, Saladin saw that his army was kind of losing control due to all of the terrible things the Crusaders had done. So Saladin tells the Crusaders to hide in the citadel until he's able to get control of his men. And that's buck wild. That's just fucking buck wild to me.
I mean, I think that is part of Saladin's, like,
It's the whole thing.
legend, right? Like, he is seen as a noble person who offers fair terms and is like, okay, hey, listen, if I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you under my terms. I'm not going to let my men just go buck wild on your asses. Like, just chill in the fucking fort for a second. I'm going to give a speech. He's such an interesting figure.
He really is. And I see why he has, like even if you look at a lot of Kurdish people still hold him up as, like, an icon, and I get why they do. He's a very interesting historical figure.
Yeah, definitely. Do you want me to talk about what my book thinks the Crusades were like before we get to our outcomes? So this book is very funny because it has about a page and a half on the First Crusade. You know, it has, and not including the full color picture. And then under that, it has a subheading called Successive Crusades. Which kind of sums it up. Yeah. So the Third Crusade is perhaps the most famous due to its role in providing the background of the Robin Hood stories. Richard the Lionheart of England set out with Emperor Frederick I and King Philip of France to defend the Christian kingdoms against the Turks, who had now unified under their great military leader Saladin. He had forged and this is all capital, Muslim Near East, all of those are capital, into a single entity, preaching jihad, which is in italics, against the Christians. And then he did capture the relic of the True Cross. Oops. The response was the Third Crusade. And then it goes on, and this is just the segment. It's immediately after that, which is later crusades failed, abounding with mistakes and accidents. The Fourth Crusade resulted in the sack of Constantinople, the great Christian city, in 1203.
Whoops.
Various conditions led to Crusaders to sack the city. The Crusaders were significantly in debt to the city of Venice, so they favored a Byzantine emperor who would repay the debt for them. The preachers of the Crusade thought the Constantinopolitans had sided with Saladin and the Muslims during the Third Crusade and had not assisted in the Second, which, like, I think is such passive bullshit. They're like, oh, somehow the Crusaders sacked Constantinople, but they did think that, you know, maybe they helped the Muslims and didn't help out in the Second Crusade, so did they deserve it?
They kind of had it coming. And you know what? They weren't even real Christians.
Yeah, they're fucking orthodoxes, so it's fine, really.
I do find it fascinating, because if you look at the Crusades through the Byzantine lens, it's the fucking pits. It sucks. Because you were hoping for a couple thousand knights to show up to help you retake some land, and then suddenly you have people who have no idea the political landscape that you have to deal with on a daily basis, and they just fucking... It's like having your terrible cousin show up at your office. Like, you don't know that we don't talk to Martha. You don't know that we don't touch Phil. We don't touch Phil's pens. You don't touch Phil's pens. And, like, the Byzantines had to have a kind of working relationship with whatever country was in the Middle East. Because they were neighbors.
It's sort of like when you call 911 and you're like, hey, I need some help. You know, I think I'm having a medical problem. And then 10 minutes later, the SWAT team kicks down your door and flashbangs you. Like,
we're here to help.
Exactly. Except instead of the SWAT team, it's just like every mall cop in the Tri-County area.
Oh, on our way, we killed a ton of pedestrians.
Just beat him to death with the segways. It was great.
Just Paul Blart. I want Kingdom of Heaven only with Paul Blart.
Oh, God. Kevin James. Kingdom of Kevin. We're doing this. Kickstarter is in the description.
What is Kevin James worth to you? Nothing. And everything.
No, it's actually still nothing.
No, let me check it over. I can't wait for Adam Sandler to greenlight this.
Yeah, we're going to make so much money. God. I'm going to read, before we close this out, I'm going to read the paragraph on the outcome of the Crusades from my textbook.
Lay it on me.
The main objective of the Crusades, the deliverance of the Holy Land and the rescue of Christians in the East, was ultimately frustrated. Nonetheless, the sacrifice of so many lives was not entirely in vain. The Crusades held back Turkish expansion into Europe for 400 years and gave Christians a more acute consciousness that their Christian unity transcended nationality and race. Did it?
Did it?
Did it, sir? Let's see.
Oh, I'm upset for this author to find out about a certain siege of Vienna.
about the other paragraphs that he wrote in this book that were extremely racist. Yeah.
Because this is not the high tide of like Muslim countries and like land ownership. What in Europe? What the fuck?
The Crusades encouraged travel and fostered a new curiosity for foreign culture among the Latin Christians. Missionaries and merchants set out deep into Central Asia, and by the 13th century had reached China. The reports from those expeditions gave Western Europe abundant information about Asia and fed the desire to explore and evangelize new territories.
And that's a benefit.
And that was a benefit for white people, yes. That is the main audience of this book.
You got me there.
I believe I tweeted out a screenshot about what this book says about the Victorian times. It's just atrocious. Yeah, so glad I purchased this used instead of for $50 from Amazon.
That might be just for like cost benefit analysis I'm doing right now. It costs like $20 to ship it to your house. The benefit, you have content for this podcast for the rest of your life.
Yes, exactly. Fun fact, I tried to negotiate with somebody on eBay and they were asking $20 and I asked for 12 and they're like $12 only covers the shipping. And I was like, okay. And then I bought it for somebody else.
You were like, that's my point. I think that's what it's worth.
Yeah, I don't know why you have this book, sir, but I do want you to suffer for it.
He wanted that $8 profit.
God. Josh, I think this has been a surprisingly good episode. Almost 50 minutes long. That's not bad.
I really enjoyed this. I would love to do more history-themed, like, things if we have to. If Michael has more birthdays coming up.
In theory, Michael will have more birthdays. And in that case, we will probably have to do another, perhaps semi-relevant to the podcast, as far as the movies we watched, but perhaps not. Maybe we'll just, open up my history textbook and pick up a random miserable page. Yeah, this was really fun.
I really enjoyed this. I don't know how in the world we would have done this if Book of Eli was the last one we did.
Yeah, so my Christian Catholic history textbook talks a lot about the apocalypse.
So here's what my textbook's opinions on the blind are.
Good news, they're probably just as offensive as the information I spouted in this video. Josh, when we are not... normally we argue about the 30 Years' War, but now we're bonding over the Crusades. When we're not having an amicable conversation about history, where can people find you on the internet?
I am at Green History on Twitter, where I am currently talking my way through my first year teaching.
You can find Michael on Twitter at MyCalsDiamonds. You can find me on Twitter at AaronSXL. You can listen to the other podcast I do at Mortified Pod. For all you people who have a crossover interest in the crusading the history of the Crusades and Kingdom Hearts, yeah, Aaron, which is just me. Me and Galila are going to be covering Kingdom Hearts 358 over 2 days. The infamous DS game that I think is potentially the best Kingdom Hearts game. So that episode will come out the Monday after this episode comes out. So please, if you if that appeals to you, just DM me on Twitter right now because we're best friends.
Yeah, if you are into that, also DM me because I just want to know. I just want to know that there are other Aarons out there in the world.
Oh God. Well, if you are weeping tears of joyful anticipation about either making new friends or learning about what really happened to Roxas during his time at Castle Oblivion, just remember that it is okay to cry because even Jesus wept. We'll see you all next time.